Welcome to Alice Just Alice 55. You're listening to an AI narrated audiobook of my original work, The Child the Sea Kept, written by Alice N. Smith. The chapter playlist is linked in the description below. Now let's begin. Chapter 2. Age 9. The Galley. Thomas had fed murderers, liars, thieves, cowards, saints, and men who claimed to be saints until the rum found them out. He had fed captains with blood on their cuffs and cabin boys with fear still soft in their faces. He had fed men before battle, after battle, and during storms so violent the pot had to be lashed to the stove like a prisoner. He had fed the dying because hunger was stubborn, and he had fed the newly dead to the sea because there was no sense wasting sailcloth on ceremony. So when the girl began appearing in his galley, Thomas did not ask what she was. He asked whether she was hungry. She was 9 by then, or near enough. A year aboard had put some weight on her bones, though not enough to make her look like any child Thomas had known on land. Her wrists were still too narrow, her face still held too much silence, her pale eyes still made men look away before they meant to. The crew called her Eva because the captain called her Eva, and aboard a ship a captain's word could make a name as surely as a priest could. Most men did not use it when she could hear. They called her the girl, the child, the sea's leavings, or nothing at all. Thomas called her Eva because she looked at him when he did, and because a child ought to have at least one thing that was not taken from her. The first time she came to the galley alone, it was well after midnight. The ship was quiet in the way ships were never truly quiet. Wood groaned, water slapped the hull, rope strained softly overhead. Somewhere beyond the bulkhead, a man snored as if trying to saw through his own throat. Thomas was kneading dough by lamplight, sleeves rolled, hands white with flour. He felt her before he saw her, not heard, felt. That was how Eva entered places. She stood just inside the galley door in a shirt too large for her and trousers patched twice at the knees. Her hair had been cut shorter since the wreckage, mostly because it tangled less that way. She watched his hands sink into the dough. Thomas said, "If you are here to haunt me, do it after breakfast. I've bread to make." Eva did not answer. Thomas wiped one wrist across his forehead and looked her over. Hungry? Her face did not change. That meant yes, Thomas had learned, or no, or I heard you, with Eva. Meaning had to be earned the hard way. He tore a small end from yesterday's loaf and set it on the table between them. There! Eva looked at the bread. Thomas turned back to the dough. For several breaths nothing happened. Then came the softest scrape of a bare foot on plank. When Thomas glanced back, the bread was gone. Eva stood exactly where she had been, holding it in both hands. "You can eat it," Thomas said. She did, not quickly, not greedily, carefully, as if every crumb was being counted by someone who might punish her for losing one. Thomas pretended not to notice. After that, she came often. Never at proper meal times if she could help it. Never when the galley was crowded. She appeared in doorways, in corners, beside sacks of flour, near the warmth of the stove. She did not ask for anything. If Thomas placed food before her, she accepted it. If he did not, she stood a while and left. He began to understand her rules by degrees. She never took what was not offered. She never ate the last of anything unless he told her twice. She watched hands more than faces. A man could smile at her until his cheeks split and she would not soften. But if his fingers twitched near a belt knife, she marked him forever. She remembered kindness too, though she did not behave like any grateful child Thomas had ever known. She did not smile, she did not say, "Thank you." But if Thomas reached for salt, the salt appeared near his elbow. If he dropped a spoon, it was picked up before his back stopped aching from bending. If he burned his fingers, a strip of clean cloth would be waiting beside the water bucket the next morning. No one saw her do these things. Thomas did. "You're a strange little gull," Thomas told her one afternoon when she sat on an overturned crate near the stove. "Most children steal sweets and lie about it." Eva looked at the pot. "I know," Thomas said. "We haven't any sweets. That is not the point." She said nothing. Thomas stirred the stew. "The point is, children are meant to be troublesome." Eva's gaze lifted to him. Thomas waved the spoon at her. "Not knife in the dark troublesome, normal troublesome. Sticky fingers, questions, crying when told no." Eva considered that as if he had described weather in a country she had never seen. Thomas lowered the spoon. "You ever been told no, little one?" The change in her was almost nothing, a stillness becoming more still. Thomas regretted the question at once. He turned back to the pot. "Never mind, foolish thought." The captain came by the galley sometimes, though never as if checking on her. He would ask about stores or water or how long the flour would hold if the next port cheated them, and Eva would go very quiet near the stove. The captain never coaxed her out. He let her remain where she was. Thomas liked him better for that. The quartermaster liked none of it. "She should not be underfoot," the quartermaster said one morning, finding Eva seated near the flour sacks while Thomas cleaned fish. "She is not underfoot," Thomas replied. "She is beside flour." The quartermaster looked toward Eva. "She is listening." Thomas kept his knife moving down the fish's belly. "She has ears." The quartermaster's eyes narrowed. Thomas glanced up at him. "Careful. If you stare much harder, you'll sour the milk we do not have." The quartermaster ignored that. "You treat her like a pet." Thomas set the cleaned fish aside and reached for the next. "I treat her like a child." "She is not yours," the quartermaster said. "Most things men feed are not theirs," Thomas said. The quartermaster looked toward Eva. "She does not belong here." Eva did not lower her eyes. Thomas saw the quartermaster's jaw tighten. It was a small thing, but small things mattered aboard a ship. A frayed rope, a loose nail, a child who would not look away. The quartermaster left without another word. Thomas waited until his boots faded. Then he said, "That man was born with vinegar where his blood ought to be." Eva looked at the door. "He worries for the ship," Thomas said, softer. "That is his way of loving anything." Eva's gaze shifted to Thomas. "Aye," Thomas said, "ugly way, but there are uglier." The first time Thomas saw her give food away, she did it badly. A deckhand with a bandaged hand had been put to light duty after catching 2 fingers between a barrel and the rail. He was young enough to still think pain made him interesting, and old enough to pretend he did not need help. At supper, he dropped his biscuit twice before managing to get it to his mouth. The third time it fell, another sailor laughed and kicked it under the bench. Eva saw. Thomas saw Eva see. Later, after the galley had emptied, a piece of bread vanished from the cooling rack. Thomas said nothing. He only wiped the counter and listened. A few moments later, there was a soft scrape outside the door. then a surprised grunt. Thomas looked out. The injured deckhand sat on a coil of rope, staring at the bread placed beside his good hand. Eva had already disappeared. Thomas went back inside and pretended the sight had not lodged somewhere behind his ribs. That was the thing about her. Men called her empty because she did not weep when they expected tears. They called her cold because she did not laugh when they expected warmth. But Thomas had cooked long enough to know that a covered pot could still boil. He began teaching her small things, never formally. Formal lessons made her vanish. "This is bay leaf," Thomas said one rainy morning, dropping one into stew. "Good for flavor, bad for chewing." Eva watched. "This is flour gone weevil heavy," Thomas said. "If you sift it in dim light, no one complains until after they have eaten." Eva watched. "This is how you hold a knife if you mean to keep all your fingers." At that, her eyes sharpened. Thomas paused, then held the knife more slowly. Not like a drunk, not like a show-off, like this: thumb here, fingers back, blade away from what you wish to keep. Eva looked at his hand, not the blade. A sensible child, Thomas thought, though sensible was not the same as harmless. The trouble came 3 days later. The ship had taken no prize in weeks, and a hungry crew was a quarrelsome crew. Supper had been thin stew, hard bread, and fewer jokes than usual. Rain hammered the deck. The galley smelled of smoke, damp wool, and men who needed a bath more than they needed a god. Eva sat on her crate near the stove, knees drawn up, while Thomas scraped the last of the stew into a covered pot. A sailor lurched into the doorway with rum on his breath and a grin too wide to be friendly. "There she is," the sailor said, "the captain's little curse." Thomas did not look up. "Out!" The sailor ignored him. "Does she speak yet?" Eva watched the man's hands. Thomas saw that and felt his own hand tighten around the spoon. The sailor stepped closer. "Maybe she only speaks to fish." Thomas said, "You are drunk, and I am holding something heavier than your skull." The sailor laughed. He drew his knife, not fast, not yet threatening enough for a proper accusation, just enough steel to shine in the lamplight. "Let's see if curses bleed," the sailor said. Thomas moved. Eva did not. The sailor leaned toward her, waving the knife near her face as if frightening a dog. "Boo!" Eva looked at him. That was all. No scream, no flinch, no backward scramble. Her pale eyes moved once from his face to the knife, then to the loose grip of his fingers. The sailor's grin faltered. Thomas came around the table with the iron ladle in one fist. "Put that away before I feed it to you hilt first." The sailor glanced at Thomas and seemed to remember there were witnesses in the world. He snorted, shoved the knife back into his belt, and staggered out into the rain. For a while, only the stove spoke. Thomas turned to Eva. His anger left him slowly. Hers, if she had any, had never arrived where he could see it. "You all right?" Thomas asked. Eva looked toward the door. Then she said, "He should not hold sharp things when drunk." Her voice was quiet, matter of fact, almost bored. Thomas stared at her. She had spoken to him before, once or twice, but never wasted words. That made each one feel less like conversation and more like something placed carefully on a scale. "No," Thomas said at last. "He should not." Eva looked back at the stove. Thomas tried to make himself laugh. "You planning to tell the quartermaster that? He loves advice from children." Eva did not answer. By morning, the sailor's hand was split from thumb to wrist. It happened during ordinary work. That was what everyone said, which meant no one had seen enough to say otherwise. A rope slipped, a pulley jumped, a blade meant for wet canvas came down wrong. By the time Thomas reached the deck, the sailor was sitting with his back against the mast, white-faced and swearing, while the surgeon wrapped his hand in cloth already blooming red. The knife lay nearby. Thomas looked at it. Then he looked across the deck. Eva stood beneath the stairs, half hidden in shadow. She was not smiling. She was not afraid. She was watching the surgeon's hands. The sailor saw her too, his mouth closed. That was when the whispers began. Not loudly. Men who feared a thing often spoke of it softly, as if volume might invite its notice. "She said it," one man muttered near the water casks. "Said what?" a sailor asked. Glancing over his shoulder, the man beside him lowered his voice. That he shouldn't hold sharp things. Another sailor crossed himself with 2 fingers. C marked her. Or the devil did, someone muttered from the end of the bench. A younger deckhand looked toward the galley door. "She looks at a man, and bad luck finds him." "He drew on her first," another sailor said. "Aye," the first man answered, nodding toward the wounded sailor. "And now look at him." By supper the story had changed shape 3 times. In one telling, Eva had cursed him aloud. In another, she had touched the knife. In a third, she had merely looked at his hand and known the blood inside it was waiting. Thomas heard them all. He slammed a pot down hard enough to make 2 sailors jump. "Eat or starve, I care little which, provided you do it outside my galley." The men took their bowls and went. Eva sat on her crate near the stove. Firelight moved over her face, making her look younger for a breath and older the next. Thomas set a bowl of stew beside her. She looked at it, then at him. "Yes," Thomas said, "it is yours." She picked it up. He stood over the stove, stirring what did not need stirring. "They are fools." Eva ate 1 careful spoonful. "Superstitious fools," Thomas said. Another spoonful. "And he did have it coming," Thomas added. Eva's eyes lifted. Thomas pointed the spoon at her. "That is not permission to start arranging accidents." She blinked once. It was not agreement. He knew that much by then. Outside, voices lowered as men passed the galley door. Omen. Curse. Sea child. Thomas heard the words and hated them, though not because he was certain they were wrong. Certainty was a luxury for men who lived on land. At sea, a man learned to respect any warning that kept him alive, even one he did not understand. He looked at Eva, small hands around a warm bowl, pale eyes lowered, bread untouched until told twice. A child, he reminded himself. Then he remembered the sailor's grin, the knife, the way Eva had watched his fingers and not his face. He remembered her voice. He should not hold sharp things when drunk. Thomas stirred the pot again and said more gently, "If you are hungry later, come before the fire dies." Eva did not answer. But after supper, when the galley emptied and the ship settled into rain and darkness, she remained near the stove, not close enough to ask, close enough to be warm. Thomas banked the fire lower and pretended not to notice. Thank you for listening to Chapter 2 of The Child the Sea Kept. If you'd like to continue the story, the chapter playlist is linked in the description below. I'll see you in the next chapter.